It was sometime past 3 in the morning when I woke up. Not because of a sound, not because of a dream. I just opened my eyes. The room was silent, like it had been sealed off from the rest of the world. The kind of silence that presses against your ears until you start to hear the faint throb of your own blood. My bedroom always felt smaller at night, the ceiling lower, the walls closer. I could see the faint outline of furniture through the half-light bleeding in from the street lamp outside. My dresser, the small chair by the window, and directly in front of my bed, the door of my closet. That door, it wasn't fully closed. A thin vertical line of darkness split the door right down the middle, no wider than a finger, but wide enough to see inside. It had always done that, refused to shut completely unless I forced it, but tonight it felt different. Like something behind it was keeping it from closing all the way. For a while, I just stared at that gap. My brain was foggy with sleep, trying to convince itself that everything was normal. But the longer I stared, the clearer I started to see it. 2 points. Small, round, faintly reflective. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. Maybe the brass handle catching the glow from the window. But then the light didn't shift, and neither did those points. They stayed exactly where they were, perfectly still. 2 eyes. They weren't glowing, not like in movies. It was subtler than that. They just caught the light differently than anything else in the closet, like moisture on glass. I could tell they were watching me. Not in motion, not blinking, just fixed on me from the dark slit between the door and the frame. My mouth went dry. Every breath felt heavier, slower, like I had to drag air into my lungs. I didn't move. I couldn't. Even my heartbeat seemed too loud, and I was afraid if I blinked, the eyes would do something. Move. Vanish. Come closer. I don't know how long I laid there like that. It could have been seconds or minutes. My eyes were watering from not blinking, but I didn't dare move. Then somewhere deep in the house, I heard it, a soft thump. Not loud, but real enough to remind me I wasn't dreaming. The air in my room felt colder. I could feel the thin film of sweat gathering on my forehead, the sheets clinging slightly to my skin. I wanted to reach for my phone, but it was on the nightstand, on the side closer to the closet. So I waited. I told myself it was nothing, that maybe it was just my reflection in the mirror propped inside the closet. I'd left it there weeks ago, half covered with clothes. Maybe the light was just catching it right. But then the eyes blinked. Slow, deliberate. Like whoever, whatever, was behind the door wanted me to see it. The reflection theory shattered instantly. A sound came next. Barely a sound, really. More like the creak of a floorboard settling, except it was coming from inside the closet. The faint rasp of wood against wood, followed by something brushing against fabric. Something moved in there. I felt my body start to tremble, not in sharp jerks, but in small, involuntary shivers. The kind that crawl up from your stomach when you realize you're not alone. My fingers clenched around the blanket without me noticing. I kept my eyes fixed on the door. The darkness behind it seemed to swell, a shape forming where there shouldn't be one. I could make out the faint suggestion of a head, the pale curve of something shifting forward ever so slightly. The eyes rose higher. That's when I realized whatever it wasn't crouched. It was standing. The closet isn't big, maybe deep enough for a few coats to hang. Yet the eyes were higher than mine, even from where I lay. If it was standing upright, its head must have been brushing the top shelf. The air felt dense, heavy. My body screamed to move, to do something, but every muscle had locked in place. My mind went back and forth, rationality clawing for control. I thought about burglars, about animals somehow sneaking in. But deep down I knew. There was no sound of breathing, no shifting weight, just those eyes, unblinking again, catching the thin thread of streetlight like 2 wet stones. The silence stretched. The longer it went on, the more unbearable it became. Until finally, the door creaked. It wasn't loud, just the faintest groan of hinges straining as the gap widened. An inch, maybe 2. I could see more now. The faint outline of shoulders. Something long and narrow hanging from its side, like fingers brushing against the inside wall. I didn't see a face, only that patch of darker shadow, and the eyes floating within it. It didn't move closer. It didn't step out. It just stayed there, watching me, and that somehow made it worse. I remember every detail: the smell of dust in the air, the soft tick of the old clock on my dresser, the faint vibration from a car passing outside. All of it felt distant, unreal, as if I was underwater and everything was muffled. Eventually I moved. Not fast, just enough to slide my hand under the blanket toward the edge of the bed. My phone was still on the nightstand, but reaching for it meant exposing myself. So I inched my hand slowly, the mattress barely shifting under the weight. The eyes didn't react. They just followed. When my fingertips brushed the wooden edge of the nightstand, I tried to hook the phone toward me. It slipped once, hitting the surface with a soft tap. The eyes blinked again. I froze. That's when I heard the sound, the smallest sound imaginable, but clear enough to cut through everything else. Breathing. Not mine. Slow, uneven, coming from the closet. Each inhale rasped, wet and shallow, like air moving through something broken. The smell reached me next, faint but unmistakable. Damp. Metallic. Like old blood soaked into wood. It didn't make sense. The closet was full of my clothes, my shoes, things I used every day. But beneath that familiar scent of detergent and fabric, there was something foul and sickly. The door moved again. Not swinging open, just trembling slightly, as if something inside was shifting its weight. I couldn't take it anymore. I bolted upright. The eyes vanished instantly. The door was still half open, but the gap was empty now. Just darkness. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it straight at the closet. The beam caught the hanging clothes first, jackets, shirts, the faint glitter of hangers. Nothing unusual. I stood up slowly, still pointing the light ahead, and took a step closer. The floorboards groaned beneath me. My hand trembled so badly the light quivered, throwing shadows across the wall. When I reached the door, I nudged it open with the tip of my foot. The hinges whined softly, and the smell hit me harder this time. That rotten metallic scent, mixed with something sweet and stale. Inside, nothing. No person. No animal. Just clothes swaying slightly, brushing against each other as if disturbed moments ago. But the back wall caught my eye. There was a mark there, faint but visible in the flashlight's glare. 2 small streaks, smudges almost circular, side by side, about the same height as my head. I stepped closer. They weren't paint. Not dirt either. They were oily, sticky, and red-brown in color. Finger marks. That was enough for me. I slammed the door shut, pressed my back against it, and stood there breathing hard. I didn't open it again until the sun came up. When I finally did, everything looked normal. The smell was gone. The marks had faded, like they'd soaked into the wall overnight. I told myself it was stress. Sleep paralysis, maybe. My mind filling in gaps between shadows and half-dreams. But that didn't explain what happened the next night. Around the same time, a little past 3, I woke up again. The closet door was open, wide this time, and from the dark inside, I could see them. 2 eyes, waiting, watching, and they blinked first. It started on one of those evenings where the air feels too still to be normal. You know the kind, where the wind doesn't move, and the trees stand there like they're holding their breath. The kind of silence that presses against your ears until you start to wonder if the world itself is waiting for something. I was walking home from a friend's place, taking the long route through the woods because it was quicker, or at least it used to be. The woods had always been quiet, but never like that. The sky was dimming, a deep bruise-colored blue seeping into black, and the last trace of daylight clung weakly to the tops of the trees. The smell of damp earth hung heavy in the air. The leaves under my boots were soft and wet, giving way with dull, muffled crunches that felt like walking on layers of old flesh. There was something about that night that didn't sit right with me. I couldn't put my finger on it, but every few steps, I found myself glancing to the sides, expecting to see something. Maybe a deer, maybe nothing. But I didn't see movement, not even a branch swaying. Just the dark shapes of trees, tall and uneven, rising like thin, black ribs against the fading sky. Then I saw it. Between two trees up ahead, something pale. At first, I thought it was just the moonlight catching on bark, but no. It was round, too round, and too high up to be a reflection from a puddle or a rock. Two pale shapes, two eyes. They didn't blink. For a moment I froze, mid-step, 1 foot halfway off the ground. My breath caught, the back of my throat dry and cold. The eyes were fixed on me, gleaming faintly from behind the trunk. They didn't glow like an animal's eyes. They were duller but wider, too wide. They didn't move, not even when I shifted. I told myself it was nothing, probably a trick of the light. But even as I tried to rationalize it, the small hairs on my arms were lifting, one by one, until my whole body felt like it was tightening around my spine. I started walking again, slowly, quietly. The sound of my steps seemed deafening in that stillness. I avoided looking in that direction, but every few seconds, the weight of those unseen eyes pressed on me until I couldn't help but glance back. They were still there, and closer. It wasn't that the thing had moved. It was that I'd gotten nearer to it without realizing it. The two eyes were behind a thick tree trunk, just peeking around the side. No visible face, no outline, just the eyes. I picked up the pace. My hands were cold, fingers stiff, but I shoved them into my pockets and tried to look casual. Tried to tell myself that the forest always felt creepy after dark, that the mind filled in shapes that weren't there. But something inside me knew. Those eyes weren't an illusion. I made it to the path's bend, where the trees thinned out. I didn't look back that time. I didn't want to, but I could feel it, the presence, heavy and low to the ground, keeping pace with me. The kind of feeling that crawls across your skin like static, settling in your bones. The path widened near the old wooden fence that marked the edge of the forest. I'd passed it 100 times before, but that night the air beyond it looked darker, thicker. It was like the world ended there. I crossed the fence anyway, boots scraping the damp wood, and stepped onto the asphalt road that led toward my neighborhood. That's when I heard it. A soft sound, wet, dragging. Something brushing through the undergrowth behind me. Not walking, slithering maybe. The kind of sound you hear when something moves on all fours, but doesn't know how to move like an animal should. I didn't stop. I didn't turn. The smell hit me next, a foul, damp rot, like wet leaves that had been left to decay for too long mixed with something sour, almost metallic. It clung to the back of my throat. I walked faster. The houses were still far off, just pinpricks of yellow light through the trees. My chest felt tight. Each step sounded louder than it should have, echoing off the pavement. Behind me, something moved again. The sound wasn't constant. It came in short bursts, like it was following in spurts, matching my pace, then stopping when I stopped. The worst part wasn't the sound. It was the silence between them. The silence that felt like waiting. Watching. I risked a glance over my shoulder. At first, I saw nothing but the black line of trees, unmoving and endless. But then, just before my eyes adjusted fully, I saw them. The same two eyes. Farther back this time, behind one of the trees at the forest's edge. They were higher now, too high for a person crouching, too high for an animal. They just hovered there, unblinking, like they were testing how close they could get without being seen. I turned away, forcing myself not to run, because something deep in me knew running would make it worse. Whatever it was, it wanted me to notice it. It wanted me to acknowledge it. And if I did, it would follow. But it already was. The walk home should have taken 10 minutes. It felt like an hour. Every few steps, I could feel it closing the distance, but never enough to see it clearly. Always behind a tree, a car, a mailbox, just out of view. Always watching. The streetlights hummed overhead, flickering every few seconds. The sound of electricity buzzing in the still air made everything feel even emptier. I passed the Petersons' old barn, its windows boarded up, and the smell grew stronger there, sweet rot and mildew. My chest tightened. I couldn't tell if it was my imagination, but I thought I saw movement behind the fence. Something ducking low when the light buzzed back on. By the time I reached my street, the silence had grown unbearable. Not even the chirp of insects. Just the sound of my own breathing and the faint, wet dragging that always seemed one step behind me. I reached my front gate and froze. The house was dark. I'd forgotten to leave the porch light on. The windows were black, reflecting only the faint orange glow of the nearest street lamp. My key trembled in my hand, metal clinking against the lock louder than it should have. My eyes darted to the tree line across the road, just shadows. But one of them was thicker than the rest. Two pale circles. Watching. I got inside, slammed the door, and turned the lock. The house groaned softly as if it, too, was holding its breath. I stood there, forehead pressed to the door, trying to listen. Nothing. Just silence. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. I told myself I was safe now. But when I looked through the peephole, I saw movement. Not the eyes this time, something else. A shape. The faint outline of something tall, wrong, pressed just behind the tree at the end of my yard. I stared for too long. When I blinked, it was gone. That night, I left every light on in the house. I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing things, the hum of the fridge, the creak of the floorboards, but each sound made my stomach twist because it all felt too alive, too aware. At some point past midnight, I heard it again. A soft scrape, like nails dragging slowly along the outside wall. I held my breath. Then, the faintest tap on the window. I didn't move. A second tap. Softer. Then silence. I waited there for what felt like hours before daring to lift the curtain. The yard was empty. The tree across the street stood motionless. But as I leaned closer to the glass, I saw it in the reflection. Two small, pale shapes behind me, staring from the darkness of the hallway. When I turned, there was nothing there. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. Over the following days, I started to notice little things. Smudges on the inside of my windows, faint muddy prints near the back door. Things moved slightly out of place. The feeling of being watched never left. It followed me to work, to the store, even in daylight. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I half expected to see those eyes again, just behind a tree waiting. It's been weeks now. The smell still lingers sometimes, faint but sharp enough to make my stomach twist. The air feels heavy at night. The trees outside my window seem to lean closer. I tell myself it's all in my head. But last night, I woke up to that silence again. That thick, unnatural quiet that feels like the world is holding still. And from outside, through the window, I saw them. Two pale eyes, fixed on me from behind the tree at the corner of my yard. I stared back. They didn't blink. They never do. And this time, I swear, they were smiling beneath them. It started with a sound that didn't belong to the room. Not a creak, not the house settling, but something softer. Something that breathed. I remember lying there, my body heavy with the exhaustion that never truly felt like rest. The air in my room that night was thick, humid, even though it was early October. I could feel it clinging to my skin, to the back of my neck, to the sheets that were supposed to comfort me. I had my fan turned on low, but even then the air felt wrong. It wasn't moving like air should move. It hung there, heavy and stale, like the breath of someone else lingering too close to your face. I tried to ignore it. I always tried to ignore things like that, but then came the sound again. A small exhale, from under my bed. It was faint, almost like the whisper of air escaping between teeth. I froze, my entire body going rigid as my brain scrambled to find an explanation that made sense. Maybe it was the fan. Maybe the fan hit something on the floor, maybe a plastic bag or a piece of paper, and that's what made the sound. I turned my head toward it, expecting to see something, anything, that would confirm the idea. But the space under my bed was too dark. Not dark like shadow. Dark like absence. Even with the faint orange glow from the streetlight filtering through my blinds, I couldn't see anything beneath it. It was just black, thick, solid black that looked like it absorbed whatever light dared to touch it. And then I heard it again. A breath. But this time it wasn't drawn in. It was let out. Slow. Long wet. I don't know why I didn't move. Maybe because I didn't want to make a sound. Maybe because some part of me knew that if I shifted, if I acknowledged that I'd heard it, it would acknowledge me back. So I stayed still. I tried to breathe shallowly, tried to make my chest rise without sound. My heart was hammering so hard that I could hear it in my ears, an irregular, panicked rhythm that felt too loud for the room. The sound came again, and this time it was followed by something else. A scrape. Something was moving under the bed, slowly, dragging against the floorboards. The sound was faint but unmistakable, the subtle friction of something with weight shifting just a few inches closer to me. I could almost feel it, like the vibration of a whisper against the frame of the bed. That was when I felt the draft. There shouldn't have been one. The windows were shut, and the fan was facing the other direction. But something cold began to move across my legs, an invisible current that slid up my blanket, brushing the skin just beneath it. It wasn't the kind of cold that made you shiver. It was the kind that made your body forget how to move, that made your thoughts dull and heavy. The kind of cold that felt alive. I don't remember deciding to look. I just did. Slowly, carefully, turning my head toward the edge of the bed. My eyes adjusted, the faint light from outside glinting off the edge of the wooden floor. And that's when I saw it. A pair of eyes, right there in the darkness, staring back at me from the black beneath the bed frame. They weren't glowing, not like animal eyes do when light hits them. They didn't shine with any color I could describe, but I could see the whites of them. I could see the dark, unmoving centers fixed right on me. And then they blinked. I stopped breathing. The movement was slow, deliberate, both lids lowering, pausing halfway, then closing completely before lifting again. Not human, not smooth. It was like something was trying to mimic how a person blinks, but didn't quite know how. The timing was off, the motion uneven. I wanted to scream. I really did. But something about the moment, about those eyes, paralyzed every nerve in my body. I could only stare. I don't know how long I lay there, locked in that silent exchange. The air felt like it was pressing down on me, thick and wet, as if the whole room had sunk underwater. Then the eyes moved. Not fast, not all at once, but a slow slide, like a head turning ever so slightly to the side, watching me from a new angle. The darkness seemed to shift with it, like the shadow wasn't just a space under my bed. It was an extension of something that didn't belong in this world. I finally forced myself to move, inching backward until my spine pressed against the wall. I told myself not to blink, not to lose sight of it. But when I did, when my eyes stung and I had to close them for even a second, the shape beneath the bed seemed to change. The eyes were gone, or maybe they had just moved deeper. The silence that followed was unbearable. It wasn't empty. It was heavy, like the air itself was waiting for something to happen. My chest hurt from holding my breath, but I didn't dare make a sound. Every fiber of my being was screaming for me to leave, to run, but something inside whispered that if I got off the bed, whatever was under it would grab me before I made it 2 steps. So I waited. The minutes stretched. The fan ticked softly in the corner. Somewhere outside, a car passed, headlights briefly slicing across the blinds. And for a moment, I saw them again, just the glint of eyes reflecting that moving light before fading back into blackness. They hadn't left. They were waiting. That realization broke something in me. I couldn't stay there any longer. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, and before my feet even hit the floor, I leapt, straight toward the door, slamming my hand against the light switch as I went. The bulb flickered on with a brittle snap. Nothing. The space under the bed was empty. The wood was dusty, a few old socks, a shoebox, but nothing else. Nothing that could have eyes. Nothing that could blink. But I didn't sleep in that room again that night. I didn't even turn the light off. I sat in the hallway with my back to the wall, staring at my bedroom door until morning. By daylight, it felt stupid. It always does. Monsters disappear with the sun. Logic comes back and tells you stories about the mind playing tricks, shadows aligning just right, the way fear makes shapes where there aren't any. But that night wasn't done with me. Over the next few days, small things started to happen. My bed skirt would shift slightly, like it had been pulled or lifted. My pillows would be on the floor in the morning, though I never moved in my sleep. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear soft tapping sounds from the floor, light, uneven, as if someone were drumming their nails against the wood just beneath where I slept. Then came the smell. It started faint, like old damp fabric, then stronger, sour, like soil and rust. It seemed to come from under the bed, and no matter how many times I cleaned, vacuumed, even moved the bed itself, the smell always came back. Always at night. And sometimes, when I was half asleep, I could feel it again, that cold draft, rising from the dark, brushing over my skin. One night, I decided to record it. I set my phone on the floor beside the bed, flashlight on, camera facing the gap beneath. I didn't expect to catch anything. I just wanted proof that I was wrong, that there was nothing there. I lay in bed, eyes closed, pretending to sleep. The room stayed still. Minutes passed. The only sound was the low hum of the fan. Then a noise. Soft at first, then clearer. A shuffle. A breath. A faint scraping. I kept my eyes closed, but every instinct screamed at me to look. When I finally couldn't stand it anymore, I reached down, grabbed the phone, and stopped the recording. I didn't look at it until morning. The footage started normal, just the faint hum of the room, the still image of the bed frame above. For the first few minutes, nothing. Then, at around 2:47 a.m., something shifted in the shadows. Not a hand, not an animal, just darkness moving against darkness. And then, for less than a second, 2 small reflections appeared in the center of the frame. Eyes. And right before the clip cut to static, they blinked. I deleted the video immediately. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I did. Since then, I've moved my bed away from the wall. I keep nothing beneath it now, no boxes, no space. Just solid ground. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when the house settles and everything goes quiet, I can still feel it. That presence. That cold air sliding out from a place that shouldn't exist. And every once in a while, when I drop something near the bed and lean down to look, I hesitate. Because sometimes, I swear, I see the faint outline of something staring back. Waiting. Not just in the darkness under the bed, but in the space between blinks. It started with a sound. A faint click, like the quiet mechanical hum of a relay inside the security camera system as it switched views between channels. I had installed the cameras a few months back, mostly because I live alone now, and the house feels too big for just one person. The silence stretches too far, into corners I don't look at anymore. Sometimes it feels like the air itself listens. The cameras were supposed to give me peace of mind. 4 of them, one for each side of the house, with night vision and motion alerts. I could check them through my phone, rewind recordings, even hear faint audio if I turned up the volume high enough. It worked, for a while. But that night, it caught something else. I remember sitting at my desk, the faint hum of the computer, the low static hiss from the security monitor beside me. The room smelled faintly of old wood and dust. My lamp cast a dull orange glow that didn't quite reach the corners, leaving them to fade into a soft blur of darkness. Outside, the rain had stopped hours ago, but the wet earth still exhaled a heavy smell through the half-open window. That's when I noticed it. One of the cameras, the one facing the backyard, kept switching to night mode. Back and forth. Click, click, like something was barely triggering the motion sensor. I leaned forward and watched. The grainy black and white feed showed my backyard, still slick from the rain. The old fence, the patch of overgrown grass near the shed, and the window, my window. For a long moment, nothing moved. I almost looked away, thinking it was just the wind or a moth. But then the motion light flicked on, and I saw them. 2 reflections in the glass. Small, round, perfectly still, too high to be an animal, too symmetrical to be anything else. Eyes. They didn't move with the light, they absorbed it like the glass wasn't reflecting anything at all. Just staring, straight through the camera, straight at me. I froze. My throat tightened as if my body instinctively refused to breathe. I waited, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was glare. Maybe it was some weird light distortion from the infrared. But the longer I looked, the clearer they became. They blinked. Not a glitch, not a flicker. A deliberate, slow blink. I sat there, staring at the monitor while the house around me felt like it was holding its breath. My ears began to ring softly. The sound of my heartbeat filled the silence. Then, just as I thought about getting up to check, the eyes, whatever they were, moved. Not back, not away. They tilted slightly, as if whoever was behind them was leaning their head, curious. And then they disappeared. I rewound the footage immediately. The timestamp was there. The motion alert had been triggered at 2:47 a.m. The blinking eyes appeared for just under 20 seconds. But when I paused the video, frame by frame, the shape wasn't human. Not exactly. The space between the eyes was too wide, the shape of the head slightly elongated, like the face pressed unnaturally close to the glass. Still, I went to the window, because that's what fear does. It drags you toward what you don't want to see. The house was colder near the window. My hand hesitated above the curtain. The air smelled different. Damp, but not from rain. A thick, sour scent, like wet soil left too long in a basement. I lifted the curtain just enough to see outside. Nothing. Just the dark reflection of my own face and the faint ripple of tree shadows against the glass. But the smell lingered. The next morning, I found faint smudges on the window pane. Not fingerprints, long streaking marks, spaced too far apart to belong to a human hand. They trailed down toward the sill, as though something with too many fingers had rested there. I tried not to think about it. Maybe it was moisture. Maybe the wind had blown debris against the glass. I cleaned it off and went about my day. But that night, it happened again. This time, the alert woke me. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, showing the motion trigger at exactly 3:11 a.m. I opened the app, expecting maybe a raccoon, a branch, anything else. But the same camera, the one facing my window, showed a shape. It wasn't standing still this time. It moved, slow and deliberate, from the edge of the frame toward the glass. The body was wrong, too narrow, too elongated, moving in stiff, almost jerking motions. It stopped just short of the window, and I swear the head tilted again just like before. Even through the black and white feed, I could see the gleam of moisture dripping from its chin, like dew or saliva. Then, for a split second before the feed glitched, it leaned forward, and the eyes appeared again. Wide, bright, focused. The video froze. I sat in bed, gripping the phone, listening to the faint hum of silence pressing against the house. The heater clicked once, and I almost screamed. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, there was another smell in the house. Not damp this time, but metallic. Sharp, like rust or blood. I followed it to the living room, and near the base of the window, I saw droplets on the floor. Small brown-red stains. Dried. I checked the outside of the glass again. Fresh smudges. The same long marks, only now there were more of them. As if something had pressed its whole face, its palms, against the window. And beneath the sill in the mud were prints. They weren't human. They were hand-shaped, but too long. The fingers dug deep into the wet soil, each ending in a narrow point, like claws. There were only 2 sets, both facing toward the window, as if it had crawled. I deleted the footage that morning. I told myself it was just an animal, just a trick of the light. I even unplugged the cameras for a while. But the silence of the house felt worse, heavier. After 2 nights, I plugged them back in. That's when I realized the system had still been recording. The backup memory card hadn't stopped. It had kept everything, from the very first alert to the last. When I checked the feed history, I found something I hadn't noticed before. During one of the recordings, right after the thing blinked for the first time, the camera had captured my reflection in the window too. Only it wasn't just mine. There was another face just behind me. Not outside, inside. It stood in the corner of the room, almost completely in shadow. I didn't see it when I checked that night because I had only looked out the glass, not behind myself. But on camera, it was clear. Its head tilted at the same unnatural angle, its eyes catching the faint light from the window, watching me watching it. I stopped watching the footage after that. Now every night, I keep all the curtains shut tight. I unplug the monitor. I don't want to see. But sometimes, when the house settles, I hear faint clicks, like the sound of the camera's motion sensor flicking on again. And in the reflection of the black screen, when the light hits just right, I think I see 2 faint shapes. Not eyes exactly, just where eyes should be. Sometimes they blink, and I've realized something I wish I hadn't. The windows are just mirrors in the dark, and whatever was watching through them that first night never really left the other side. It started as a long, uneventful drive through the back roads of northern Pennsylvania. Nothing but a stretch of damp asphalt winding through endless trees. I was coming back from a late shift, exhausted, half aware, the kind of tired where every hum of the engine sounds like a lullaby. The forest pressed close on both sides, swallowing the road in thick, black silence. No streetlights, no houses, just the constant thrum of the car and the faint whisper of wind weaving through branches. The road was slick from rain. The wipers made that rhythmic, wet squeak across the glass, smearing beads of water instead of clearing them. I could smell the damp pine through the cracked window, heavy, earthy cold. My headlights barely cut 30 feet ahead, fading into mist that seemed to move like breath. There's a stretch of that road, locals call it Hollow Bend, where cell signal drops to nothing, and even the radio turns to static. The kind of place where you feel watched, even when you're alone. I wasn't thinking about that at the time. I was just focused on the hypnotic motion of the lines on the asphalt, the way the car tires hissed against the wet surface. Somewhere past mile marker 47, the fog thickened into something unnatural. It rolled low and heavy, swallowing the light until the world felt smaller, tighter. I slowed down, leaning forward over the wheel. Every now and then, I thought I saw movement between the trees, shadows darting just beyond the reach of my headlights. Maybe deer, maybe nothing. But then I noticed the silence. The rain had stopped. No patter on the windshield, no rustle of branches. Even the engine seemed quieter, as if the woods themselves were swallowing sound. My skin prickled. The air felt different. Stale, dense, almost electric. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a reflection. 2 small lights ahead on the road, white, round, hovering low to the ground. I slowed the car to a crawl. Maybe an animal's eyes catching the headlights. Raccoon, maybe. Or a stray dog. But as I got closer, the lights didn't move. They didn't dart away like animal eyes do. They stayed perfectly still, watching. I pressed the brake. The car rolled to a stop about 20 feet away. The shape behind those eyes, it was wrong. I couldn't make it out clearly through the fog, but it stood upright, tall. The glow wasn't like normal reflection. It was steady, almost pulsing faintly, as if the light came from within them. I turned off the high beams, just for a second, and the eyes remained, glowing against the dark like embers behind smoke. The outline around them shifted slightly, like it was breathing. For a long moment, I just sat there, engine idling, heart pounding so loud I could hear it over everything. My hands were slick on the steering wheel. I couldn't explain why, but something deep inside me screamed not to move, not to blink. The fog seemed to bend around it. It was like looking at something that shouldn't exist, something the air itself didn't know how to hold. I could see the faintest shimmer of skin, pale, stretched thin over something lean and unnatural. And then it took a step forward, not fast, just one deliberate step. The sound of its foot pressing into wet asphalt was too loud in that silence. Like flesh slapping stone. The eyes rose slightly, higher now, taller than me, taller than the car. I don't remember breathing. The world shrank into that single spot of light and motion. My mind tried to make sense of it. Deer, bear, someone in a costume, anything human, but none of those fit the way it moved. Its limbs were wrong, too long. Its head tilted slightly, and I swear the eyes narrowed, focusing on me. I reached for the gear shift, intending to back away slowly. My fingers shook so bad they barely found it. When I looked back up, it was closer. Half the distance gone in the blink of an eye. No sound, no movement that I could see. Just closer. The eyes now so bright they lit the fog around them like halos. I could see the faint outline of its face, a suggestion of features, thin and hollow, as if the skin had been pulled tight over bone. Something dripped from its jaw, a thick, dark fluid that hit the road with a soft pat. My foot slammed on the gas before I even made the decision. Tires squealed against the wet road as the car lurched forward. For a split second, the headlights washed over the thing completely, its whole body visible in the beam. It wasn't human. Its arms were long enough to brush the ground, fingers ending in points that curled inward like claws. The body looked carved out of ash, skin rippled with veins that pulsed faintly under the surface. And its chest didn't move like a normal creature's. It expanded and collapsed in a slow, unnatural rhythm, like something imitating the act of breathing rather than doing it. Then it vanished into the fog. I didn't see it move. One moment it was there, the next, nothing. Just the fog swallowing it up again. I kept driving, faster than I should have, the road twisting and slick beneath my tires. I didn't look in the mirrors. I didn't dare. But even as I sped away, I could feel it. That sense of being watched. That heavy, crawling feeling between my shoulder blades that told me those eyes were still somewhere behind me, following just out of sight. After what felt like an hour, I burst out of the fog onto clearer road. The forest thinned, the moonlight returned, and my breathing finally started again. I checked the clock. It had only been 10 minutes. 10 minutes. When I finally made it home, I parked the car and just sat there in the driveway. The air smelled like wet earth and cold metal. My hands were trembling so badly, I could barely turn off the ignition. I kept seeing those eyes every time I blinked, those glowing, unblinking eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every noise outside made me flinch. A branch scraping the window, the hum of the refrigerator. Even my own heartbeat felt foreign. But what unsettled me most was what I found the next morning. Across the front of my car, streaked through the layer of dried rain and mud, were long, thin smears. They ran diagonally across the hood, 5 distinct marks, deep enough to scrape the paint. The edges weren't clean like a tool would make. They looked more like the result of something sharp dragged slowly, deliberately with intent. And in the center of the hood, just above the grill, was a single muddy print. Not a hand, not a paw, something in between. I tried to wash it off, but the mark stayed faintly visible, no matter how hard I scrubbed. A few nights later, driving home again, I took a different route, one that looped around the woods entirely. But still, I caught myself glancing into the trees every few seconds, looking for light, for eyes. Once, I thought I saw them again, far off between the trunks. 2 faint white glows, perfectly still. Watching. I told myself it was just reflection, just headlights from another car. But there were no other cars on that road. Not that late. Not out there. The worst part isn't that I saw it. The worst part is how often I think I still do. Sometimes when I drive at night, I see shapes shift in the fog just for a moment. Sometimes I catch glints of light in the woods that vanish when I look twice. And sometimes, when the night is especially quiet, when the rain stops and the air feels heavy again, I swear I can see a faint pair of glowing eyes reflected in my rearview mirror, pacing me from just beyond the edge of the light. It never tries to pass me. It never falls behind. It just watches, waiting for me to drive that same stretch again, waiting for me to stop, because I think whatever stepped onto that road that night knows exactly where I live now. There's a kind of stillness that basements have at night, a weight in the air, like the air itself forgets how to move. Even the hum of the house above feels different, muted, almost respectful, as if sound doesn't want to go down there. That's what it was like in my basement. Quiet, thick, heavy. I never liked going down there after sunset. The light switch was at the top of the stairs, but it never seemed to make much difference. The bulb hanging in the center of the room was weak, an old one, with a dull yellow glow that made shadows pool in the corners instead of clearing them away. The walls were concrete, cracked in some places, with that strange, sweet, rotting smell of damp cardboard and mildew. It was the kind of place where the cold felt alive, where it clung to your arms and followed you up the stairs even after you left. That night, the air felt heavier than usual. The power had flickered earlier in the evening, just once, a short blink that made the house go silent for half a heartbeat. I had been watching TV when it happened, and for that brief second, the dark felt different, like it pressed in closer. I told myself not to think much of it, just an outage somewhere down the road. But a little after midnight, I heard something from below, a soft, dragging noise, like cardboard sliding across the floor. Then a faint, hollow clink, metal against concrete. I froze. The TV was still on, its blue light flickering across the room, and for a moment I just sat there listening. The sound came again, and I realized it wasn't just once. It was rhythmic, spaced apart, like something gently tapping or scraping. It was coming from the basement. I tried to convince myself it was something simple. The furnace. A mouse. Maybe even the old pipes contracting. But there was a small problem. Our furnace hadn't worked for weeks. It was silent. Dead. So I stood up. Slowly. The sound stopped the moment I did. For a long minute, I stayed there, halfway between sitting and walking, staring at the door that led down to the basement. The door was painted white, but the paint was old, flaking, and warped around the edges. It had a keyhole that looked far too deep, like it went further into the wood than it should have. Then came another sound, not scraping this time, a shuffle, like something adjusting its weight. That was enough to make me move. I stepped toward the door and pressed my ear against it. I could feel the cold from the other side seeping through the cracks, and beneath it, a faint hum. It took me a few seconds to realize what that hum was. The sound of the refrigerator downstairs, the one I'd unplugged weeks ago. When I opened the door, the air that hit me was damp and earthy, like the smell of wet cement after rain. The wooden steps creaked under my feet, soft and hollow, and each one sounded too loud, echoing into the dark below. I flicked the switch at the top of the stairs. Nothing. The bulb didn't turn on. I tried again, flicking it twice more. Still nothing. So I stood there, my hand on the switch, staring into the pitch-black stairwell. That's when I saw it. Two faint, pinprick reflections near the bottom. Tiny dots of light, like something metallic catching a stray glint. But there was no light down there. Nothing to reflect. I leaned forward, squinting, and for a second I thought maybe it was the shine of a tool, or something I'd left near the base of the stairs. But then those tiny dots moved. They shifted, slowly, blinking. Eyes. They were eyes. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until my chest started to ache. I took one slow step back, and as I did, the eyes vanished. Gone. Not like they moved away, but like they'd been swallowed by the dark itself. I closed the door. Not fast, but carefully, as if slamming it might draw attention. Then I just stood there with my back pressed against it, listening again. Nothing. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it had been light from the TV reflecting off something metallic downstairs. Maybe my eyes had adjusted wrong to the dark. There were explanations, logical ones. But the longer I stood there, the less convincing those explanations became. Because after a minute, I heard it again. The scraping sound. But this time it was slower and closer. It wasn't coming from the far end of the basement anymore. It was coming from the bottom step. That was enough. I went to bed. I didn't turn off the lights in my room. I didn't close the door. I just lay there, listening to the faint creaks and distant sounds the house made at night. Sounds I'd always ignored until then. Except now, every small creak sounded like something moving. When I finally fell asleep, it wasn't for long. I woke up around 3 a.m., and the sound was back. A soft dragging from below. Slow. Consistent. Like something heavy being pulled across the concrete floor. I didn't move. I didn't even lift my head. I just stared at the ceiling, listening. And after maybe a minute, I realized the sound wasn't confined to the basement anymore. It was on the stairs. There's a very specific kind of sound that old wooden steps make when weight presses down on them. The low, stretching groan of wood under tension. That's what I heard. One step. A pause. Another step. It was moving up. I turned my head toward the hallway. The faint light from the lamp outside my room stretched across the carpet, but the top of the stairs was still hidden in shadow. I watched that space for what felt like forever, waiting to see something, anything. But nothing came. The house went silent again. I don't know how long I stayed awake after that. Maybe hours. When morning finally came, I forced myself to go downstairs. The basement door was still closed, but there were marks on it. Thin, pale scratches along the bottom half, long, uneven, like someone had dragged metal claws across it. The kind of marks that don't happen overnight. But I knew they hadn't been there before. The light switch still didn't work, so I brought a flashlight. I remember the click of it turning on was too loud in that silence. The beam cut through the dark, and I saw the usual clutter, boxes, old furniture, tools. Nothing out of place. The air was freezing. My breath came out in pale mist. Then I saw it again. The eyes. Not far this time, maybe 10 feet away, behind a stack of old boxes. The same faint, reflective glint. Perfectly still. The beam of my flashlight trembled slightly in my hand, and I realized something that made my skin crawl. The light wasn't catching on the surface of anything. It was being reflected back, like animal eyes. Only these weren't the eyes of an animal. They were too high off the ground, too symmetrical, too focused. And as I stood there, frozen, those eyes blinked. I took one step back. The eyes didn't move. Another step. Still there. Then, without sound, they began to rise. Not forward, just up, like whatever they belonged to was slowly standing. The beam of my flashlight caught the faintest outline of something tall and narrow. Long limbs, thin shoulders. Its skin, if it had skin, looked too smooth, too reflective, like wet glass. And then all at once it moved. Not fast, not sudden, but deliberate. It took one slow, swaying step to the side, disappearing behind the concrete column near the furnace. Gone. The air in the basement seemed to tighten. My ears rang, like the silence itself was too loud. I backed toward the stairs, keeping the flashlight pointed straight ahead. Halfway up, the beam flickered. Once. Twice. Then died. In the dark, I heard it again. A soft breath. Not mine. Coming from below. I didn't wait to hear more. I ran the rest of the way up, slammed the door, and locked it. I didn't go back down there for days. When I finally did, when I had no choice because of the breaker box, the eyes were gone. The air was dry again. The smell was weaker. But something had changed. There were prints on the concrete floor. Not shoe prints. Something else. They were long and uneven, as if someone had dragged their fingertips through dust and then pressed their palms into it. And near the back wall, where the prints stopped, there was something drawn in the grime. 2 circles side by side, perfectly even. Eyes. It's been weeks since then. The basement light still doesn't work. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the faint hum of that unplugged refrigerator running somewhere down in the dark. And once, just once, I thought I saw a faint reflection again when I passed by the basement door. Not bright, not moving, just there, watching. It started with a noise I couldn't explain, small, irregular, and faintly alive. It came from above my bedroom ceiling, from the attic that I had never once opened since moving into the house. At first, I thought it was just the old wood settling. Houses like this, they make sounds when the air changes temperature, or when the pipes rattle after a long shower. But the sound didn't match that. It wasn't the moan of timber or the click of cooling metal. It was something shifting, slow and cautious, as if dragging itself across insulation. There was dust up there, layers thick enough to soften any sound. Yet, I could hear it, like fingernails pushing through soft sand. I remember the exact night it became impossible to ignore. It was cold, and the wind pressed softly against the sides of the house. My heater hummed, and the sound wrapped the room in that steady, familiar warmth I'd come to rely on. But underneath it, under the hum, there was a faint scrape. A pause, then another. The ceiling creaked lightly, once, twice, then fell silent. I stayed still on my bed, my eyes tracing the faint outlines of light slipping through my blinds. The sound didn't return. Not then, but the image of something moving just feet above me didn't leave my mind. For days, I told myself it was mice. Maybe a raccoon that found a way in through the roof vent. But the attic was sealed. The realtor had told me that. The previous owner had the entrance nailed shut after the insulation was replaced. There shouldn't have been anything alive up there. Yet, something was. The first time I decided to check, I waited until late afternoon. I thought daylight might make it feel less wrong. I dragged the ladder from the shed, brushed off a line of cobwebs, and brought it inside. The attic hatch sat in the hallway ceiling, a square of old wood surrounded by faint dust lines. When I pulled it down, it resisted, like it hadn't been touched in decades. The metal hinges moaned softly when they gave way. A rush of cold air dropped down. It smelled like dust and dried wood, but underneath it was something else. Something faintly sour, like old insulation soaked through and left to rot. I climbed the first few rungs. Each creak of the ladder seemed too loud, too sharp in that stillness. The air got colder with every step. When I reached up to push the hatch open fully, a small cloud of dust fell against my face. I coughed once, then raised my flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, spilling over long wooden beams and forgotten boxes. Everything up there looked undisturbed. Except, there was a space near the far wall where the insulation was torn back, like something had been clawing at it. I stood there, half inside the attic, half out. The quiet was heavy, not empty, watchful. And then, just at the edge of my light, I saw them. Two small, pale circles, glinting faintly from behind an old stack of boxes. They didn't move. They didn't blink. They just stared. I froze. My hand trembled, the flashlight shaking enough to make the beam stutter across the attic. For a moment I thought they were just nails, or some reflective bit of metal. But the shape of them was wrong. They weren't flat. They had depth, round, wet-looking, and disturbingly human in the way they caught the light. I stayed there too long, long enough for my knees to lock and the skin on my arms to prickle with cold. They never moved. When I finally climbed down, I closed the hatch and pushed the ladder aside. My chest felt hollow, like I'd left something behind up there, something waiting for me to come back. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that reflection. Not glowing, not bright, just there. Watching. The noise came again around 2 a.m. Softer this time. Slow drags, followed by stillness. And then tapping. Not like footsteps. Not like something walking. But deliberate, slow taps on the beams, one by one, directly over where I lay in bed. The heater's hum did nothing to drown it out. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and held still, trying not to breathe too loud. I could almost feel the ceiling vibrate with each sound. When I finally looked up, I thought I saw something darker than the rest of the ceiling. A shadow, shifting slightly as if adjusting its position. But maybe it was just my eyes trying to make sense of the dark. The tapping stopped, and then came a faint, slow scrape across the ceiling toward the hallway. I didn't open the attic again for a week. The days passed quiet, almost peaceful. But I could feel it up there, like a heartbeat I couldn't hear but somehow knew was still beating. Sometimes things in the house felt misplaced. A picture frame on the hallway table tilted slightly. A faint trail of dust where there shouldn't be one. Nothing big enough to prove anything, but enough to keep the thought alive. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it, that my mind was stretching shadows into shapes, until one night the sound changed. It was faster, not the dragging anymore, something more frantic, like hands patting against the wood. The attic hatch rattled once, just once, and then silence. The next morning, I noticed faint smudges on the edge of the hatch door. Not dust, not stains. They were darker, like the marks of fingertips pressing against it from the inside. It was getting colder outside by then, early winter. The house's walls held that kind of chill that no heater could really fix. I found myself staring at the ceiling more often than not, tracing the faint lines of where the attic sat hidden. Sometimes I thought I could hear breathing from up there. Soft, slow, careful. I tried to ignore it, but one night, something strange happened. I woke up suddenly, heart pounding, not sure why. The air in the room felt thicker than usual, heavy and unmoving. I turned my head, and in the faint orange glow from the streetlight outside, I saw something on the wall across from me. A shadow. Not large, not distinct, but wrong. It was shaped like someone crouched down, head tilted slightly, watching. I blinked. The shadow didn't move. And then slowly I realized it wasn't on the wall. It was cast from above. I followed the angle of the faint light, up toward the ceiling vent that opened into the attic space. Two small circles glimmered faintly through the slats, reflecting the streetlight's glow. They were looking down, straight at me. I didn't move for almost an hour. The eyes stayed there, still, fixed on me. But when I finally turned my head away for just a second, when I looked toward my nightstand, toward the clock that read 3:42 a.m., I heard it. A shift, wood creaking softly. And when I looked back, they were gone. The next morning, I packed a few things and drove to a motel 2 towns over. I told myself I'd go back when I felt ready, when I could explain it rationally. But even now I can't. The police said there was no sign of anyone living up there. The insulation was disturbed, yes, but no footprints, no droppings, no proof of any animal or person. They said maybe the light from my flashlight had caught old glass or a bit of metal, something reflective. But the marks on the attic hatch, those they couldn't explain. They looked like fingerprints burned into the wood. 5 distinct shapes, pressed hard. That was months ago. I don't live in that house anymore. But sometimes when I close my eyes in a quiet room, I swear I can feel it again. That pressure of being watched from above. And once, in the motel's bathroom mirror, just before the light flickered, I thought I saw a pair of faint reflections behind me. Small, round, completely still, until I blinked, and they moved. It started with a faint creaking noise above me, barely noticeable, like the sound of old wood settling after a long day of rain. But I knew that sound. I knew the rhythm of my own ceiling, the way it groaned when the temperature changed, the way it clicked when wind brushed against the roof. This wasn't that. This was slower, heavier, a dragging, deliberate movement that came in bursts. Thud, slide. Thud, slide. I remember lying in bed, eyes open in the dark, not sure if I was awake or trapped somewhere between dream and awareness. My room was cold that night, colder than it should have been. The air felt still, too heavy to breathe, and there was a faint metallic scent, like rust or blood that had dried hours ago. My house was old, built in the late 1950s, with walls that whispered and pipes that moaned whenever the temperature dropped. I used to find that comforting, a sign of life in a place otherwise empty. But that night, there was nothing comforting about it. Every creak and sigh sounded intentional, like the house itself was holding its breath. When I first heard the sound, I thought maybe it was a raccoon or a squirrel trapped in the attic. That happened before. But when I reached for my phone, the clock on the screen said 3:14 a.m. And for some reason, that hour made the noise feel less natural. I stared up at the ceiling, listening. The sound came again, only this time closer. Thud, slide. Something heavy, shifting its weight just above where my bed sat. The plaster faintly trembled. Dust drifted down from the edges of the ceiling fan. I didn't move. I just watched. My heartbeat filled the room, loud and uneven. The fan above me wasn't on, but one of the blades twitched, ever so slightly, as if something was brushing against it from the other side. And then silence. The kind of silence that hums in your ears when the world goes still. My eyes strained in the dark, adjusting to the faint glow from the streetlight leaking through my blinds. I could make out the shape of the ceiling fan, the faint outline of the beams running across the ceiling. For a moment, I thought I saw something there, something darker than the dark itself, pressed against the ceiling near the corner of the room. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe a shadow. Maybe my eyes playing tricks. But shadows don't move like that. It shifted, crawling across the ceiling with slow, measured motions. Its limbs didn't bend right. Too long, too jointed, like arms pulled from a puppet and stretched until they cracked. I could hear its weight pressing against the old wood, the faint scraping of nails or claws dragging over paint. And then, I saw them. 2 small, red eyes, glowing faintly from the darkness above. Not bright, not like a reflection, but alive. The kind of glow that pulsed like a heartbeat behind translucent skin. They didn't blink. They didn't shift. They just stared straight down at me. The air in the room thickened. I could feel my chest tightening as though breathing itself might draw attention. My body screamed to run, but I couldn't move. My eyes locked on those two red dots burning in the dark, and every instinct I had told me that if I looked away, it would come closer. So I didn't. I stared back. Minutes passed, maybe hours, I couldn't tell. Time had no weight anymore. Only the rhythmic sound of my pulse and the faint creaking of the ceiling where it crouched above me. Occasionally it would shift, and flakes of old plaster would rain down onto my blanket. The smell of dust mixed with that metallic tang again, stronger now, sharp enough to sting the back of my throat. And then it began to crawl. Slowly, almost lazily, it moved from the corner to directly above me. Each motion sounded wet, like flesh dragging against wood. I could see more of it now, the outline of its limbs spreading across the ceiling, jointed like a spider's, with too many fingers, too many angles. The faint sheen of moisture glistened where the streetlight touched it. When it stopped, those eyes were centered right above my face. I remember thinking how human they almost looked. If a human could have eyes that didn't blink, that shimmered red in the dark like embers still smoldering after a fire. I tried to convince myself that maybe I was dreaming, that I'd wake up soon, but then it did something that shattered any hope of that. It grinned, not in a visible, clear way, but I heard it. A wet sound, like lips pulling apart after being sealed shut. The faint stretch of skin, and then soft, clicking noises, one after another, coming from its throat. Not speech, not breathing, just clicking, like it was testing a sound it liked. The creature stayed there for what felt like forever, its head, or whatever part of it the eyes were on, turning slowly as if studying me. I don't know how long I lay there, paralyzed, eyes locked on the thing above me. I only remember that eventually, something in me snapped. I blinked, just once, and when I opened my eyes again, it was gone. I sat up instantly, gasping, my chest burning. The ceiling was empty. The faint red glow was gone. I turned on the lamp beside me, flooding the room with a pale, shaky light. Nothing, just dust, the old fan, and the faint crack lines where the plaster had warped over the years. But my blanket was covered in fine white powder from the ceiling, and there were finger-shaped smears across the paint above my bed. I didn't sleep after that. I sat awake until morning, staring at that ceiling, waiting for the sun to rise. When it did, I grabbed a ladder from the garage and climbed up to inspect the marks. The plaster had deep gouges in it, not random scratches, lines that curved inward, like something had clung there with deliberate strength. The shape wasn't human. There were too many finger marks, too deep, pressed almost half an inch into the plaster itself. For weeks afterward, I tried to convince myself it had been sleep paralysis. Or maybe I'd been hallucinating. But every night, the same feeling came back, the air growing heavy, the faint metallic scent filling my lungs. Sometimes, I'd wake to faint dust falling onto my pillow. Sometimes, I'd hear a noise just beyond the ceiling. And then one night, I saw it again, not in the same place. This time, it was in the hallway, crawling along the top of the wall near the ceiling, its limbs folding and unfolding like a centipede's legs. The red eyes flickered in and out of the dark as it passed by my doorway. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just watched as it paused at the edge of the doorframe, those same eyes turning toward me, glowing faintly against the black. It didn't enter. It didn't need to. It knew I saw it. That night, I slept in the car. When I came back the next morning, I swore I'd sell the place. But before I could make the call, I went into the living room and saw the ceiling above the couch. Dozens of small handprints, all the same size, all pressed outward from inside the ceiling. I don't live there anymore. I moved across the state, far from that house, far from that room. But sometimes, late at night, when the air goes still and the world feels too quiet, I swear I hear it again. That faint thud, slide, above me. And once, just once, I caught my reflection in the black glass of my TV. Behind me, on the ceiling, two faint red eyes, waiting, watching, and I swear, they never blinked. I've always hated how quiet it gets out here after midnight. The kind of quiet that feels thick, where every sound becomes too sharp, too personal. You can hear the way your own heartbeat moves through your chest. The wind brushing against the wood of the barn. The faint hum of insects in the grass, though they sound more distant than they should, like they know something you don't. That night, I went out there because I thought I heard something. Not just once, but over and over again. A kind of rustling, slow, heavy, deliberate. It wasn't the usual kind of noise you hear around a barn. Not the dry scurry of rats. not the soft shifting of hay. This was slower, something dragging. The barn stood about 50 yards from the farmhouse. An old structure, weathered gray from years of sun and rain. Its roof sagged slightly in the middle, and one of the doors leaned off its hinges, creaking whenever the wind caught it. At night, it looked like a gaping mouth waiting for something to step inside. I told myself it was probably nothing, a raccoon, maybe a stray dog, but I still grabbed my flashlight. The good one, with the heavy steel handle that could double as a weapon if I needed it. The air outside was cold, the kind of cold that sticks to your skin like damp cloth. The grass was slick with dew, and every step toward the barn sounded too loud. The flashlight beam cut a narrow path through the fog that hung low over the field. Every now and then, I thought I saw movement ahead, just the faint shift of shadows between the slats of the barn wall. But when I stopped, everything went still again. The smell hit me before I reached the doors. It was faint, but sharp enough to sting my nose. Not rot, exactly, but something stale, like wet fur and earth that had been sitting too long without air. There was something animal about it. The wooden door protested when I pushed it open, its hinges screeching like something dying. Inside, the dark felt heavier, the kind that swallows sound. Even the wind outside seemed to die the moment I stepped through. I raised the flashlight, its beam trembling across the walls, over old tools and rusted farm equipment buried under a decade of dust. Cobwebs hung in thick sheets from the rafters, catching the light like stretched silk. At first, I didn't see anything, just hay scattered across the dirt floor, and the usual clutter that had accumulated since my father stopped using the place. But then I heard it again, that dragging sound, slow, uneven, coming from the far side, near the stalls. I aimed the beam toward it. Nothing, just an empty stall door, slightly ajar. The smell grew stronger the closer I walked. My boots sank softly into the layer of dust and straw. There were faint marks in the dirt, like something had been pulled along the floor. Thin grooves, side by side, that vanished into the dark corner beyond the last stall. When I reached it, I hesitated. Every part of me screamed not to look, but my hand moved on its own, raising the light. The beam caught movement, small, quick, and low to the ground. For half a second, I thought it was just a raccoon, maybe a possum. But then more movement. Not one, not two. Dozens. Shifting, scattering. And then the light hit them. Eyes. Dozens of them. Reflecting the beam back at me from the darkness of the stall. Some small, some wide, some too high off the ground to belong to anything crawling. Each one a pale, shimmering point. A colorless gleam like glass catching firelight. They didn't blink. They didn't move away. They just stared. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't even tell how deep the stall went. The light didn't seem to reach the back. It just disappeared into that void of shadows, with those eyes staring back like something half hidden, half emerged. For a moment, I thought it might be animals trapped in there. Cats, maybe. But then they started to shift. Not scatter, just ripple, as though every body in that darkness was connected somehow. A slow, crawling undulation, like a mass breathing in unison. The beam trembled in my hand. Dust floated through the light in slow motion, thick and golden. I could hear my own pulse in my ears, steady and too loud. I wanted to run. I should have, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, watching those eyes. Then a one blinked. Only one, near the top of the cluster. It was slow, deliberate, like it was testing me. And when it opened again, I realized something was wrong. It wasn't the reflection that moved. It was the light itself shifting on something wet. The surface of that eye gleamed too bright, too alive. And then, all at once, more of them blinked. I stepped back without meaning to. The wood behind me groaned. And then, from inside the stall, came the sound of claws against the floor. A scraping, clicking rhythm that crawled toward me. Not fast. Not yet. Just steady. I aimed the light lower, and my stomach turned. They weren't feet. Not hooves, not paws. Something pale and thin, like fingers, dragging across the dirt. Too long to be human. Too thin to be animal. The hands, because that's what they were, disappeared into the dark mass of movement. And behind them, something rose. The eyes lifted. Not all together, but in pairs, like they were attached to faces that were slowly standing. I couldn't tell how many there were anymore. Too many to count. Some tall enough to brush the beams of the ceiling, others small, hunched, twitching. Their silhouettes didn't make sense. Some were angular and sharp, others bloated and rounded. But every single one had those eyes, bright and unwavering. The air turned sour. I could taste it now, iron rot, mold. The smell of something old and wet. The beam of my flashlight started to flicker. Each pulse of darkness seemed to bring them closer. I took another step back, hitting the open barn door behind me. The night outside looked almost inviting compared to what stood in front of me. Then the light went out. Just for a second. But in that single heartbeat of blackness, the sound changed. A burst of movement, scraping, dragging, shuffling. Too many limbs. Too many bodies. When the light came back on, they were closer. Halfway across the barn. Their eyes burned in the light. The reflection was stronger now, like they were feeding on it. And the closer they came, the more the beam dimmed, as if the darkness itself was swallowing the light. I stumbled backward through the doorway, gasping for air that didn't taste like metal and dust. The cold hit my face like a slap, and I ran. Behind me, the sound followed. Not running, not chasing, just that dragging rhythm, slow and patient. Like it knew I couldn't outrun it forever. When I reached the porch, I turned and shined the light back at the barn. The doors were wide open now, both of them. For a moment, I thought I saw shapes in the doorway, tall, crooked outlines, but then the light flickered again. When it steadied, they were gone. Just the empty barn standing there, still as ever. But the eyes, they didn't disappear. They lingered, faintly, in the dark just beyond the threshold. A shimmer here, a glint there, as if dozens of tiny mirrors were watching me breathe. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed inside, flashlight clutched in my hand, staring out the window toward the barn. Every so often, I thought I saw movement behind the slats. A flicker of reflection, a soft scrape of wood. But I told myself it was nothing. Had to be nothing. By morning, the doors were closed. No footprints in the dirt. No sign of anything living or dead inside. But the smell lingered. That same wet, metallic scent drifting faintly through the open air. I locked the barn later that day. Chained it shut. Told myself I'd tear it down someday soon. But sometimes at night, when the wind shifts just right, I hear it again. That dragging sound. Slow, steady. Moving just behind the walls of the house. And when I shine the flashlight out toward the barn from my window, I can still see them. Dozens of faint, glowing eyes. Watching. Waiting. Never blinking. I first saw them on a night that didn't feel like it should have been any different from the rest. The kind of night that just sits heavy on your shoulders, quiet, windless, and thick with the smell of damp leaves and decaying wood. The kind of silence where even your own heartbeat feels too loud. The cabin sat right at the edge of the woods. I'd rented it for a few weeks, just to get away, to disconnect from the noise of everything. There wasn't another house for miles, and the only sound at night was the occasional crack of a branch under its own weight or the rustle of dry brush moving under invisible feet. That night, the forest was still. The trees stood like a black wall, their tops swaying slightly against the pale glow of the moon. Beyond that tree line was nothing, no trails, no lights, just the endless dark that seemed to breathe on its own. I remember stepping outside with my flashlight, the beam slicing through the mist that hung low across the ground. The air smelled wet, heavy with that earthy scent of moss and rot. My boots pressed into the mud, making faint sucking noises as I walked toward the back of the property where the forest began. That's when I saw them. Two small, pale shapes suspended just beyond the reach of the light. They weren't moving, just hovering, two white dots, perfectly still between the trunks. At first, I thought they were reflections, dew on the leaves, maybe, or an animal. But they were too level, too deliberate. The beam of my flashlight hit them directly, and they shimmered, not like glass, not like fur, but like something wet. The rest of the forest stayed quiet. No movement, no wind. Just those two tiny points staring back at me. I remember the sensation that crept into my chest then. It wasn't fear at first, it was curiosity. But behind it, something slow began to unfurl, like a realization that whatever I was looking at was also looking at me. When I blinked, they blinked too. I lowered the flashlight, then raised it again, tracing the same spot through the fog. They were still there, still perfectly still. But this time there were more. 4, then 6, then 8. Eyes, small, reflective, unblinking, floating just beyond the tree line, like tiny pearls suspended in the darkness. My breath caught in my throat. The hair on my arm stood up. The woods felt like they were holding their breath too. Every instinct in me said to go back inside. But I didn't. I just stood there, frozen, the flashlight trembling in my hand. The smell of the woods suddenly changed. It wasn't earthy anymore. It was metallic, sharp, like blood mixed with wet bark. Something had shifted in the air, and the fog seemed to thicken, creeping closer to my feet. When I took a single step forward, the eyes moved. Not back, forward. They didn't step into view. They just seemed to slide closer, as if the darkness itself carried them. I couldn't see any bodies, no shapes, no silhouettes. Only eyes, gliding silently between the trees. They were closer now, close enough that I could tell they weren't all the same size. Some were wide and round, others narrow, almost human. The way they hovered wasn't natural. They floated at different heights, some near the ground, some higher, like they were stacked on invisible bodies of impossible shapes. My mind tried to rationalize it, deer maybe. But deer eyes don't move like that. They don't blink in unison, and they don't approach when you stand your ground. The fog curled around my legs now, and I could feel the air turning colder by the second. My flashlight flickered once, just once, and every muscle in my body locked in place. When the light came back, the eyes were closer. I stumbled back instinctively, my heel catching on a root. My shoulder hit the ground, and for a second, the flashlight rolled away from my hand, casting its beam in a wide arc that cut through the mist. What I saw in that sweep wasn't just eyes anymore. For a brief, flickering moment, I saw shapes, tall, crooked figures half hidden by the fog, thin limbs reaching from behind the trees. The faint, glistening suggestion of wet skin. The reflection of light on something that shouldn't reflect, like bone, polished and slick. Then the flashlight went out. The darkness that followed was alive. It wasn't silence, it was the sound of something breathing. Not one thing, many. The subtle, collective inhale of something just beyond reach. The faint rustle of leaves. The whisper of wet soil shifting. The sound of weightless steps approaching through the fog. I scrambled for the flashlight, my fingers sinking into the mud until they found the cold metal cylinder. I hit it against my palm, once, twice, and it flickered to life again. The beam caught the tree line again. The eyes were gone, every single one of them. The fog had swallowed the space where they'd been, and the forest looked empty again. But the silence didn't feel like relief. It felt staged, like the woods were pretending nothing had happened. I ran back inside, slammed the door shut, and locked it. The cabin felt too small, too exposed. The windows were only single-paned glass, and the trees outside pressed right up to the edge of the clearing. I turned off all the lights, except for the one in the corner of the room. The soft yellow glow didn't help much. It only made the shadows deeper. Every creak of the wood floor made my stomach twist. Hours passed, or at least it felt like hours. I sat near the window, staring out into the darkness beyond the trees. The fog hadn't lifted. If anything, it had thickened, like the forest had exhaled it on purpose. Then, from the corner of my vision, movement. Two faint glimmers, barely visible through the window pane. They were back, floating just beyond the tree line again. Perfectly still, perfectly aligned. And then another pair appeared beside them. Then another, and another. They weren't coming from the woods this time. They were forming in it. One by one, pairs of eyes materialized in the mist until there were too many to count. A wall of them, all watching the cabin, all facing me. I felt the vibration before I heard it, a low hum, deep in my chest, like something was growling through the earth itself. The glass of the window trembled faintly, the air thick with pressure. I killed the light. Darkness swallowed the room, and for a few seconds, the only thing I could hear was my own breathing. But the eyes didn't fade with the loss of light. They glowed on their own, faint and pulsing, like embers under ash. They were closer now. The first few pairs were no longer beyond the trees. They were between them, moving, sliding forward without sound. I pressed myself against the wall and tried not to breathe. Every instinct screamed at me to look away, but I couldn't. My eyes locked on theirs, as though the act of looking was the only thing keeping them from crossing that invisible line. But the fog was creeping closer too, rolling in waves across the grass, swallowing the trunks and the roots. I blinked just once. When I opened my eyes, the first pair was gone. I scanned the line. They were still there, but the nearest ones had vanished. Like they'd slipped into the fog, or worse, into the space between where the light could reach. Something brushed against the side of the cabin. A long, dragging sound, like nails against wood. It moved slowly, scraping from one end to the other, stopping just beneath the window. Then silence again. When I dared to look, the eyes had returned, but this time they weren't outside. Two small glints reflected from the corner of the window inside the glass, faint but undeniable. I stumbled back, my shoulders slamming into the wall, heart pounding so hard I could taste iron in my mouth. The air felt wrong now, thicker, damp, with a faint smell of rot that hadn't been there before. The window pane fogged up from the inside, as if something was breathing against it. And then a shape, just the faint outline of a face, pressed against the glass. Not human, not animal. The mouth too wide. The eyes perfectly round, glowing faintly from within. When I blinked again, it was gone. The woods outside were still. The fog had stopped moving. The night had gone silent once more. But I didn't sleep. I didn't move. I sat there until morning light crept through the trees, pale and gray, illuminating the clearing. There were no tracks in the mud outside, no prints near the window, no sign that anything had been there at all. And yet, as the sun rose, I saw something that turned my stomach cold. On the inside of the glass, faintly etched into the condensation, two small, perfect ovals. Eye-shaped, like something had pressed its face to the window, watching me through the night. I haven't gone back to that cabin since. But sometimes, when the air gets thick and the woods fall silent, I swear I can still feel that same pressure, the weight of something watching from just beyond the trees. And when I close my eyes, I can still see them. Dozens of pale shapes, floating in the dark, waiting for the moment I blink.